I'd like to talk about this whole idea of the Rugas first, since that's the older body of work. And the Rugas are kind of an imaginary group of animals that are created as a part of this lake buff environment that I have been involved with for about 20 years. I taught, as you may or may not know, at Nicholls State University for the majority of my career in teaching, and as part of that, love the environment and love the place, and along with a couple of other guys, found a place on Lake Buff that we could go out and just fish or hunt or do whatever one wants to do. And one of the things that, of course, I wanted to do was have a place that I could go and draw and work out some ideas and that sort of thing. And this was and is a perfect environment in which to do that. And so we, for years and years, have enjoyed the wildlife that's there, both the wildlife as well as the plants that grow in that particular area. And so that's where the origin of these comes from. The Urds part of this that are not present in this exhibition are what are akin to birds. And there are the lighter and the more, I suppose, enlightened part of the group. The darker side of that is these Ruga figures, both in terms of the full figure as well as these, which this time around have a lot of affinity not only for just being heads of these animals that have hair or fins or tusks or claws, any of those more aggressive kinds of forms. Not that birds are not, but they're a lot less so, I think, than these creatures are. And these creatures are all done out of copper. There, as the statement says, a lot of this evolved around the idea of the trophy heads that hunters you might be familiar with, that hunters kind of crave, I think, and of course put on the wall and that sort of thing. And so these have some affinity as far as that's concerned as well. I don't know if you have any questions about these. I'll be glad to answer them for you. But that's the part of the collection here. I, as you may or may not know, am always interested in different materials. And so a lot of this not only incorporates strips of copper as well as pieces that have been cast, but also there's some bone in these, and I've used various materials other than the copper in their creation as well. Well, I also want to talk about the newer work, which is the wands that you see. I have 50 of them up here on the wall, and these were carvings that I actually started in the last weeks in April. And so made all of these since April, last part of April. And the idea, as you might have read on the wall over there, comes from the last book of the Bible, the Revelation. And it is, that book is an account given by the angel to St. John the Divine, who relates it to us as Christians, and who gives an account of what is to come after with Christ's coming. It describes the churches that are in this area of Turkey now, Asia Minor, as it was called at the time, and these various cities, and the kind of determination that they're to have in these last days. It's a wonderful account, and it's filled with very descriptive and beautiful language as to what these different entities will be, both spiritual and physical. And so we have a combination of not only the devil in his different guises, but also those evil spirits that are produced as a result of him, i.e. the two beasts. On the other side of that equation, so to speak, is not only the principle for whom the book is written, Jesus Christ, but also the angels and the members of the four winds at the corners of the earth. There are and is a remnant that's to be brought forward, and there are numerous souls, both who are to be commended, some to be damned, all to be a part of this final judgment. And so all of these images, I think, are incorporated in these pieces. A lot of people might have the idea that maybe there's some kind of paradox here at play, and indeed I think there is, the idea of having a wand with this kind of imagery imposed upon it. And so that's also a part of this that I think is both interesting and intriguing for me. These forms as wands sort of had their genesis in the idea of walking sticks and of making serpentine forms out of pieces of wood, limbs that I had found, and that evolved itself into a smaller version of that, which I'm going to use as far as the wand format is concerned. Another thing about these that I think is interesting is the idea that when you do subtractive sculpture, it's much different than fabricating something or making something out of a material that's then translated into yet another material, i.e. when you're doing casting or fabricating, this is often the case. You start out with something that's out of paper or cardboard or that sort of thing. It's reproduced in metal, sheet metal, welded together and set in place. That's a whole different kind of technique than taking a material that is already there, a pre-existing material, and then subtracting from that material in order to get the finished form, the intent that the artist has for that particular form. And so I think you can see where this can get, in a way, could be very limiting, right? But at the same time, it also produces for the artist a challenge to get that iconography in to that particular space and make it a powerful or a forceful kind of image in the end. And so that's what I hope I have done as far as these pieces are concerned.
Was your starting point a passage in Revelation, or did you just pick up a...
No, it was. After reading this and teaching it for a while, John, I got to the point where that a lot of these pieces of wood, as I would just find the branch and that kind of thing, would suggest some of these kind of images that I might be able to find just by carving it. The branch, the natural branch of this azalea wood, has a way of making those kind of suggestions as to what the final form could be. So,
can you relate one of the wands to a particular passage?
Well, sure. Let's see. Let's take maybe this one, which is one of the two witnesses. And as I don't know if you know that story or not, but there are going to be these two witnesses who are going to come, and they're going to travel the earth. And for a long time, people didn't think that was very possible, that everybody on earth would see these two figures as they walk the world. Well, as you well know now, we can see any kind of image from any place in the world and be able to transmit that with hardly any kind of difficulty. And so think that makes a lot of sense. And of course, this is because of the shape of the wood that this works so well to put the two figures at the top. Some of these I carved in such a way that these are really meant to be handled, no doubt about it, not just on the wall, although I think they look good on the wall and the way they're hung. This one, for instance, is one about the old dragon, and this was a larger piece of the azalea wood, and so I decided it was broken, and so I decided to use this part of it for the flame and then make the head here and then do this long thing with the snout, even to drilling this to get the nostrils and everything in place.
Michael, can you talk about these two series being shown together? You have one that uses natural material to talk about a spiritual subject, or something that might be a little more heady,
Right.
as opposed to using metal to describe more of a, even though it's fantastical, still a natural, animalistic.
In an unnatural material.
Right, exactly. Can you talk about that dichotomy?
Sure. The idea of using the metal, of course, is such, I like, as you might know, all kinds of metal as far as that's concerned, and depending on what kind of form I want to create, that's generally the way that's arrived at. These, I always, this whole series has always had this kind of whimsy, I guess, is a good way of describing it. A certain amount of whimsy incorporated into it, a certain bit of playfulness. That's what all this trophy head thing is about, because I'm surrounded by a lot of hunters who are very, very grateful for their 12-point or 18-point or whatever it happens to be on the wall. And so I thought that would be a good way of maybe showing these things. These creatures, although they have this kind of fantastic quality about them, do have a certain amount of, I think, a certain amount of humor and that sort of feed to them. And even though they are fantastic in their appearance and that sort of thing, I think the metal, that brightness of the metal, or the way the metal is finished, using the wire to simulate the hair, using the tubing to simulate these tusks and that sort of, and teeth and that sort of thing, all lends itself, I think, to that form rather well. And so that's the reason why I'm using that. The wood has a certain kind of character of its own, and there's a certain amount of immortal kind of aspect, I think, to wood. And even though wood rots and deteriorates, that's a natural kind of process for a rather natural sort of subject matter, as I think these can be, and to help play with that, those ideas of both the physical world and the spiritual world coming together within a material.
From reading the biblical passage to how you're going to conceptualize this to on a stick to actually producing that piece of work, how long does it generally take you to produce each piece?
It depends on the piece, obviously, I would think, but maybe a week at the most. Most of the time I'm working on about 2 or 3 pieces at a time is the way I do this. And they're in various stages of being carved, and I start just by penciling in what I'm going to do, where I'm going to do it, and that sort of thing. And then these are, without exception, just created with an X-Acto knife and a drill, various bits and that sort of thing. But it's the way they're fabricated. So I hope that answers that. But No, it's about a week to complete one.